you have no point to almost be here, which I think in particular for men is a very important thing. As soon as you speak to someone, you know. Like I speak to people from who we work with, business coaching, fitness coaching, and I know straight away they'll be successful, not just because of within a millisecond the way they communicate, the way they look you in the eye. Like,
my biggest fear is not moving forwards, and I wholeheartedly mean that. Staying the same, that really scares me.
It's all about the chase rather than it's like about the hunt rather than catching, right? It's
absolutely.
Like, that's the fun bit.
You've hit the nail on the head there, reading between the lines of what you said about outcome and process. You know, you're not going to have a purpose if you don't know where you're going.
I hadn't really been giving myself the opportunity to do, and I was like, as soon as it clicked, I was like, holy shit, this is why I feel a bit not off, but not quite fully aligned. Today is going to be an absolute treat. So this is Dan's third appearance, but first time in person on the podcast. Dan is almost what I like to call the pro trainer, high performance coach, worked with over 30 professional athletes, champion athletes, world title winning boxers, professional footballers. So today I'm really going to pick your brain in terms of some of the marginal gains in terms of what people look at in terms of higher level sport, and maybe perspectives that people don't look to, which can apply to their own fitness and mind journey in terms of how you can basically become the optimal human being. I actually said before, this is the best shape I think I've ever seen you in as well. It's the Dubai Sunshine. When you're looking at people who are high performance, what does high performance mean to you?
For me, Charlie, it means consistently becoming better each and every day. And there's a word that screams out at me. It's a Japanese word, kaizen, which I'm sure you're familiar with. Is constant, never-ending improvements. And it also, for me, means it has to be relative to the individual and contextual to their situation. And what do I mean by that? So if we've got two ends of the spectrum here, you've got CEOs and professional athletes. A win for a CEO and high performance for a CEO might be training 3 times a week, drinking 2 litres of water a day and getting 7 hours sleep a night. That might be high performance contextual to their situation. Whereas a professional athlete, if they're doing that, that's very much a minimum requirement. They're not really going to improve. So for them, it might be tracking your objectivity and data via Whoop, sleep, passing that over to your coach, having some interventions and talks around what progression there looks like, nutrition, obviously being really doubled down on that to merge that with your training. So it looks very, very different. So it has to be specific to the individual, in my opinion, but getting better each and every day, for me, that is what high performance is.
I would agree, and I actually think from a male perspective, whenever I'm unhappy or not as happy as I would like to be, is because I feel like I'm not progressing. And if you don't have a purpose in life, you have no point to almost be here, which I think in particular for men is a very important thing. So I think you being in high performance, you having a purpose, the two are coexist, because the purpose then almost makes you high performance because you've got a rabbit you're trying to chase. You
know where you're going, and funny you should say that, because I came out of your event, incredible event by the way, and I did a post, and it was, my biggest fear is not moving forwards, and I wholeheartedly mean that. Staying the same, that really scares me. Progression is everything to me.
I agree. It's all about the chase rather than it's about the hunt rather than catching, right? It's
absolutely.
That's the fun bit. And why do you think some people maybe struggle to get that mindset? And have you always had that?
It's a skill that's been evolved, for sure. It's something that I've worked on over time. I think you've hit the nail on the head there, reading between the lines of what you said about outcome and process. You're not going to have a purpose if you don't know where you're going. And one of my favourite quotes, sorry to go philosophical, is, if one does not know to which port one is sailing, no wind is favourable. You are literally just treading water. So you've got to know where you're going, and that for me would be the outcome orientated goal. But then you've got to reverse engineer and put the steps in place to reach that goal. So for me, having the goal is important, yes, but your purpose comes from setting the goal and then putting the systems in place to reach it. So the best analogy there would be like the building the wall. The outcome is to build the wall, we get that, but you don't ever think about that anymore. You focus on laying brick by brick by brick, and then before you know it, you've closed the gap and reached the outcome. So I think, going back to your question, where does the purpose come from? For me, I know exactly what I'm trying to do. I have complete clarity with the vision. For some, they might not have that. So I would take a moment with yourself and see what really truly intrinsically drives you, and then put the steps in place to reach whatever that outcome looks like.
And that's what you call alignment, right? Because when you're aligned with who you want to be and where you want to go, it's then not difficult then to get up and just do the thing you're supposed to do. It just happens.
It just happens.
Yeah.
And it's powerful, isn't it?
Yeah.
I know your purpose and mission, and mine is similar in my own kind of context, and it is. I bounce up out of bed every single day, with purpose and desire to improve. Here's
another thing I'd say is, it's almost like the respect of when game meets game. It's when you, as soon as you speak to someone, you know. Like I speak to people from who we work with, business coaching, fitness coaching, and I know straight away they'll be successful, not just because of within a millisecond the way they communicate, the way they look you in the eye, like the way they hold themselves. What do you think that is?
And the way their eyes light up as well. Like some might, who may not understand me, see me as quite intense, but actually it's just I'm driven by my mission, and my mission is to leave every single conversation making the other person a little bit better or adding value to that individual. Whether I can do that, maybe that's subjective, but what do I think that is? I think that's someone who just has complete alignment and knows who they are and what they're trying to do. So and I suppose thinking the other side of that coin, maybe I do feel a little bit sorry for people who don't have that, and it must be hard, but I would just identify, maybe a little task for the listeners, if they haven't got that purpose and desire and know where they're going, is just sit with themselves for a while and say, what really drives me? What actually really will help me get up out of bed? Is it serving others? Is it whatever else? And then maybe put the steps in place, because for me, that's going back to what fear is and what I'd be scared of. I'd be really scared of having that lack of purpose and desire and direction of where I'm going.
100%. There's, I actually went on a personal development course with John D. Martini recently, and what I'd recommend everyone does, if you get his book, it's called Values Factor, I think. It is. There's an exercise in that I actually did on the plane on the way there, and I was like, holy shit, this is why I felt a bit off, because like I sort of loosely knew what my values were, but like a couple of them I hadn't really been giving myself the opportunity to do, and I was like, as soon as it clicked, I was like, holy shit, this is why like I feel a bit not off, but like not quite fully aligned.
And on that, Charlie, what I'd say on that as well is, like, for anyone listening, please don't think that we've cracked this.
Oh, no,
we're constantly trying to get better.
And your values will change.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because, like, your values will change as you get older, as you have kids, you get married, like, whatever it might be, right? And I haven't been fortunate enough to have that yet, but I imagine when I get to that point, my values will start to change in perspective. And I think that's also why people need to spend some time actually critically thinking, reflecting of, like, who do I want to be and where do I want to go, rather than just, like, going around on the fucking merry-go-round.
Yeah.
When we look at people in terms of high performance athletes maybe who come into you, what would you say some of the low hanging fruit of the things you first address when they come to you that like are easy wins that you tend to see? Is like there a common trend in terms of easy fixes, if there is ever such a thing?
Yeah, I think with anyone embarking on a high performance journey, athlete or other, is from a practitioner's viewpoint, is not to overwhelm them and give them 20 things to do. I think that's really important. Like, we all aim to live a life of high performance, and we all know there's so many different things out there that we can add to someone, but if they're applying none of them and then they're going to fall off course, then what's the point? So I think the communication aspect of that and how you deliver is actually fundamental from a practitioner-led model to the client or athlete. So it might be early on just a couple of quick wins. So I'll go back now 6.5 years. One of my roles is head of performance at Matchroom Boxing, and I went into that gym, an already winning gym, I must stress. Definitely felt like there was a lot that could be improved, and thankfully we have improved massively over the past 6 years. But I identified what they were currently doing, and that's key. Instead of me going in with a bull in a china shop mentality and going, you've got to do this, you've got to do that, okay, let me sit on the ring rope and just absorb. Watch. Let me see what you're doing well. Let me see, okay, well, you didn't really do a warm-up there. Okay, after your training, you literally just ran straight out of the gym without any stretching, cool down, or, changing your autonomic state. Okay, how's that then going to impact your sleep? Well, all of these things factor into that, the outcome, which is high performance. So I did two very simple things. Some of which weren't even using objectivity. They weren't tracking their heart rate. Bear in mind, this is over 6 years ago, so things have changed slightly now. But for me, that was just mind-blowing. So how am I going to advise them from a bioenergetic point of view to drive a physiological adaptation for their sport if I've got no idea? I'll be like, I've got no idea what's actually happening at the moment. So first thing was to buy a heart rate monitor and track their zones. I'll analyse that data and then I'll, plan accordingly.
What would you recommend for anyone listening in terms of heart rate monitors? Because people are probably thinking that now, like, what's the best one to get?
Yeah, well, there's loads out there at the minute. You've got Garmin, Strava's for the kind of running crew. We use something that has more of a gamification element for our business. We use a MyZone just because it gets everyone on a leaderboard. We have prizes. It's pretty cool, but in terms of accuracy, maybe questionable. Whoop now have, as part of their wearable, they have exercise expenditure as well, which I've yet to fully analyse. I'm actually going to get one of those and move over from Aura once I'm back in London. So look, there's lots on the market. We've used Polar before, and the accuracy was really good. Battery life, not so, very temperamental. So I think just choose which one works for you. Apple Watches are okay. Not too sure on the accuracy. But yeah, we tend to use Whoop for our athletes because we also then look at a lot of other metrics that feed into what we're trying to influence,
Makes a lot of sense. And with what you said there in terms of the autonomic nervous system, how much of a role do you think that plays with athletes and even Gen Pop? Because, like, for example, with me, like, I'm super type A, super driven. I'm like fucking always switched on.
Yeah.
And I also know that my cortisol levels are like sky high all the time, but that's just become normal.
Yeah.
To the point where I've been trying like adrenal peptides and like everything to try and curb it, bring it down.
Yeah.
Is that something you see as a problem? Because obviously cortisol is catabolic and also blunts fat loss, which is obviously going to be probably the goal of a lot of people here. What would you say people should try and do to try and maybe mitigate that?
I think it's important. I think, look, for the listeners, kind of autonomic nervous system 101. So you've got the autonomic nervous system, you've got two subdivisions, you've got parasympathetic and sympathetic. So sympathetic is like your fight or flight, kind of how you said you're always feeling on, and the opposite of that is parasympathetic, rest and digest. So very simplistic overview. And let's use my boxers, for example. You know, you haven't got 10 other teammates. If you're having a bad day at the office, you're on your ass. So you've got to be on, you've got to be switched on. But you can't be switched on all of the time. And we know one of our key pillars in my business, Perform 365, is recovery. So what is the best recovery modality out there? Sleep. Okay, well, if they're on all of the time, is that going to be negatively impacted? Well, likely yes. So then we've got to create the optimal sleep environment and start trying to bring them down and make that shift after their session. So when they're boxing, when they're doing their S&C, we want them on. You know, we want them performing at a high level. We want high neuromuscular outputs. But then as soon as they finish that, we want to start making that shift. So we do at the end of our session, we do some breath work, we do some kind of leg elevation drills and start trying to bring them back down. And that's where the music might change. We go high BPM in the session. The music then might either come off or change in terms of the BPM. We then, try to minimize any blue light exposure pre-bed, which emphasis on the word try, and I'm guilty of this. I'm looking at my phone all the blimmin' time. I use, and I have them in the bag there, I've got some Whoop blue light blocking glasses, which one of my athletes, John Ryder, bought for me, which is great. So we try these methods. Whether they get applied on a day-to-day basis, I really don't know. But caffeine, ergogenic aids can come into it. Are you having your caffeine too late? And if so, is that going to impact your sleep and keep you on all of the time? There's just creating the optimal environment that allow you to kind of rest and digest is what's important, and there's a lot of modalities that we can do to influence that, and we absolutely look at all of those. Breathwork is an interesting one. What do you do in terms of that aspect? We, again, if you're looking at the relationship between breathwork and autonomic state and making that shift, the fight or flight is kind of quite short, sharp breaths, and rest and digest, parasympathetic shift would be more diaphragmatic, more deeper breaths, so longer duration holds. So just, again, the environment would be music off, dimming the lights, because, again, all of these things will lead towards one division, and we want to make that shift. We do kind of a leg elevation drill and just try and get them to close their eyes and just focus on their breathing, so deep inhalations, and that over time can impact that autonomic state. Very simple.
It's interesting, even I just seem to wake up and I'm automatically off like a fucking rocker. So one of the things I do is only probably 2 minutes, but I use an app called Insight Timer, and I literally sit on my balcony and it basically counts down from 10 to 1, but slow inhales, exhales, just to calm myself down. And I'd probably say I feel twice as calm afterwards, just instantly. Yeah. It's amazing how much that just puts you in a better space, to start your day.
Interesting.
I'd like to do longer meditations and all that type, but I can't. But I want to go do stuff.
Yeah.
So it's
you and me both. I think we're very aligned in that regard. And you even making the conscious effort and awareness piece to do that is really good, because I guarantee you're going to be a lot more present after those couple of minutes. I think that alongside, which is great in Dubai, not so great in London, getting some light exposure in the morning to impact circadian rhythm is really important. So there's some 2 quick wins, and just sets you up for the day. It also therefore means you're not then being reactive to the devices we constantly have in our hands, and then we're playing to someone else's tune. We're in control. And the longer you can be not looking at your phone to play to someone else's tune, I know you're a big advocate for this, is for me vitally important.
100%. I think that's where people spend their entire life now distracted and being pulled from pillar to post rather than being in control of their own focus. And that's, I know, one of the other things we were really going to talk about. One thing I do see though is that we look at the nervous system and we talk about recovery. Do you think some people sometimes try and overcomplicate recovery and get too anal to the point of almost they stress themselves out more about I've got to fucking do X, Y, Z. I can't. eat because I've got to go to bed in half an hour, or like whatever it might be.
I think so, and I think in today's world, Charlie, listen, I'm massively led by objectivity, absolutely. Working at the highest level of professional sport, we need to utilise objective data to inform our decisions, without doubt. We do it with our CEOs as well, but we don't use the data with the CEOs as literal. Okay, well, my Whoop or Aura says X, your HRV's fallen off the cliff. That therefore means, well, you're not going to train for 3 days, or you can't do X and Y. Well, no, because you've got to get on with your day to day. So we use it to inform decisions and have a better conversation. Do I think we've gone too far down the recovery rabbit hole? I like it to a degree. I think things have their place, like infrared saunas and other modalities out there. I think cryotherapy chambers could be questioned. There's an element of placebo involved, in my opinion, from the research that I've read.
I think for me, it's like a big dopamine hit and adrenaline. Like, you feel like you're fucking on cloud nine afterwards. But my personal opinion is that heat is better for recovery than like extreme cold temperatures. Yeah,
and also I think as well, like you look at this from where are the quick wins, going back to one of your first questions of, if this individual is only having 5 or 6 hours of sleep an evening each night on average, that for me is going to be a lower hanging fruit and having a much better ROI than them doing an ice bath or them doing a cryotherapy chamber for 3 or 4 minutes, because you're papering over cracks. We need to identify what's the big needle mover, create the optimal sleep environment as well. And this is key as well. It's like, if I tell a high performing CEO, you just need to sleep more, he's like, well, tell me something I didn't know. Well, what do I pay you for? Well, yes, we identify that sleep is fundamental, and it for me is the biggest and best recovery modality out there that costs absolutely nothing. But the next layer of that is, how do we then do that, and how do we create the optimal sleep environment? And that's from a lot of what I just said about changing autonomic state, minimizing blue light exposure to the negatively impact melatonin production, and even nutrition could come into it. If you're having your evening meal at 10 o'clock and you're trying to get to bed at 10:30, you're just igniting the metabolic processes. So you need to obviously try and eat earlier. So there's a number of things that do go into that, and sleep for me is the best recovery modality. Everything else out there for me is just the cherry on top of the cake. You've got to have the cake first.
I agree completely. It's people are like, it's the analogy of you're stepping over dimes to collect dollars. Sorry, stepping over dollars to collect dimes. Because it's like, this is a really easy thing you can go and do that people don't overlook.
It's not sexy though, is it? Let's be honest. Like,
and it doesn't sell, right?
It doesn't sell unless you're Whoop and you're Will Ahmed and you've got a $1 billion business. But anyway, no, joking aside, it sells now because of the objectivity led with it. But sleep in general doesn't sell. No, I completely agree. All of the other modalities, they do, which is why they're there.
Do you set like an agenda and schedule for like clients and athletes when they're working with you, in terms of like, okay, if you're training this time, you need to do stretching afterwards, you need to do X, Y, Z, this is the type of therapy you need to do every week? What does that look like out of interest?
Absolutely. We follow an individualized approach. Everything we do is completely bespoke, but of course we have a system. We don't just throw a load of random X at the wall and hope it sticks type thing. We have a system I've been a practitioner 18 years, worked in professional sport at the highest level for well over a decade. So because of that, I developed what I believe is a high performance system, not just for professional athletes, but now is for the biggest CEOs on the planet in the boardroom. And there's massive synergy between the two, which I'm sure we'll talk about. So broad overview, we have a 4-pillar approach: training, nutrition, recovery and mindset. I feel these days, and leading on from the last point of all of these modalities out there and kind of shiny object syndrome, and I'm going to do that, I'm going to do this. We'll actually focus on the fundamentals first. We break things down with those 4 pillars, because otherwise for newer clients who are on their high performance journey, they just become very much overwhelmed, especially with the power of social media. So training, nutrition, recovery, mindset. Training and nutrition merge together hand in glove. We use like the fuel for the work required model of, okay, if you've got high training outputs, then we probably want to be fueled adequately for that to achieve those outputs. We use a very simplistic traffic light system. So red is like, well, that's a tough day. That's a high stress day. That might be a heavy 5x5 back squats, and or it might be a very high intense session or a boxing sparring session. That's red. We know you can't do red every single day because your body will break down. There has to be an appreciation piece around recovery optimization to allow for adaptation to occur. Then you'll have green. Let's just use red and green for now, forget amber. Green is like your zone 2 work, your low end stuff. I did it the other day, which blew my mind. I was on the vertical stepper, level 14, heart rate averaging around 140, and I climbed, gamification element, the Burj Khalifa, looking at the Burj Khalifa, which I felt it blew my mind, which is pretty cool.
What gym was that
at? So that was actually at my apartment gym. Okay, they've got a vertical stepper there, which is brilliant. I know you're a big fan of as well. And it's great. I can send emails, I can leave voice notes, I can speak to the team when I'm doing it. So that for me is a green. And obviously you don't want to do green every single day, you never really improve, but that will improve the efficiency of the aerobic system, the cardiorespiratory system, that will then feed into your reds. So then you have to choose the reds and greens and, you know, plot accordingly over the course of the week to allow for you to recover and not just train hard every single day. So yeah, that's kind of our 4 pillars. That's our dose response method. Okay, training stress, dose, response. How do you respond? And the 3-pronged approach of training stress. So stressor, recovery, adaptation. Simple. Okay, kind of physiology 101. There's your stressor, training stress, whether that might be green or red. Then you recover, sleep being the best recovery tool. Could use some of the others if you so wish. And then you adapt. And the adaptation piece is, imagine a mountain, you're just climbing that mountain, you're getting closer to the summit of whatever the hell that looks like, whether that's a marathon, whether that's getting on stage, looking ripped, whatever the goal is. But you've got to adapt. But you only adapt if you provide the right stress, you recover from that stress, and then you improve.
It's interesting you say that, because I did a podcast a couple of days ago with Alex Kickel, actually mentioned it earlier, who's a genius when it comes to like brain function, performance enhancing supplements for your brain. We spoke a lot about something I'd never thought of before, is that yes, you can push yourself mentally, but as you have high performance, like cognitive days, you actually need to have rest days for that as well, to let your brain reset. And I was like, I'd thought about it physically, but never from a mental perspective.
Yeah, it's interesting. Exactly that is, you just can't going back to being on all of the time. There's certain times and aspects you just have to pull back, and there has to be an appreciation piece around that, which is hard for people like us who are always on.
Yeah. I get frustrated that I feel my mind can go further than my body wants to go. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Even to the point like. I now only train 4 days a week, but actually I'm getting more progress now doing that than training 5 days a week, which is counterintuitive to what most people would think. Yeah. And for me, it actually suits me because it saves me like 2-3 hours a week in terms of like going to go do another weight training session by the time I get there back and piss around. So it's interesting that most people don't think like that though.
It is. And also what I will say is, listen, I'm all for training hard. I train hard. I train 6 days a week. I do train hard. I do have an appreciation piece around our traffic light system, but I'm very consistent with my training. So I'm not sitting on here and saying, oh yeah, you know, listen to the Whoop, the data that says, oh, you're 5% lower than where you should be, don't train. Well, no. Train hard, go for it, keep your foot on the gas, but just have an awareness piece around recovery optimization, because you can only train as hard as to what you can recover from. Otherwise, you'll break down.
100%. I think that sometimes, the older you get, you learn to use your brain more than your balls in some respects. Like when I was younger, I'd just be stupid. I feel like shit. I'm just training away. And last week, I felt a bit ill after the event, and I was supposed to train with Wale and a couple of other people. I was like, I'll just go and do it, and it was actually fine. Okay. But sometimes, you know, when you're like, this is probably not a good idea. I was training upper body, so it's not going to be that bad. Yeah. But if I was going to go and train legs, it's like, no, I'm doing that, because I've done that before, and then the next day, like I can feel my CNS is like dead.
Interestingly, though, what I'll say for the listeners, Charlie put a hell of a lot into that event, right? So what are we reading between the lines there and saying you put a lot into that, even though it wasn't physical, like everything, you were drained. So you got to the end, I started feeling a little bit ill. That's because you were in a heightened level of stress, because it meant a lot to you. So yeah, that makes sense. It's
not funny, but it's logical when you start to think like that. Yeah. But I'll give you another good example, right? It's like first world problems. But I remember I went to the Maldives. Last time I went to the Maldives, I was like super stressed, been working loads. I went there to like relax. As soon as I got there, I got ill. Because like my body just shut down, and like literally I was like sick for 4 days.
Yeah. That used to happen to me every time. My family live in Dublin. Every time I used to go to Dublin for Christmas, exactly the same, because I tried to be present with the family, and I'd just get ill every time. Well, slightly different actually, because it's bloody cold in Dublin as a comparison to the Maldives, but anyway.
It's a different perspective from that respect. I think one of the things I mentioned earlier is like you've gotten into really good shape. Like I think you had an injury, I think previously when we sort of first met. What's the biggest thing you've implemented in your own training over the last 12 months?
Yeah, well, firstly, thank you. And I do try and live and breathe this. I do manage injuries. I do manage and work around injuries, certainly, but always keep moving forwards. You know, I've had spinal surgery 10 years ago. I've had to manage that. And I was speaking to someone this morning, actually training with him in my apartment, and we were saying about I do believe everything happens for a reason. I've learned so much from that. Studied extensively Professor Stuart McGill around the trunk, around the the mobility work that I do on a daily basis. That's a complete daily non-negotiable. So all of that, without doubt, that's been happening for a while. Specifically to your question, over the last 12 months, I have been doing some loaded mobility work, some like yielding ISOs where I kind of hold positions. So for example, for context, again, did it with the guy today because he was so blimmin' tight through his hips. We do a front foot elevated split squat. We come down to like a 90 degree position. The back knee goes deeper than it would, because the front foot's elevated, so you're increasing the degrees of flexion, and holding that position for 2-3 seconds, and you're actually elongating the tissues and structures of the hips. And you know how we're sitting now, if you think of the hip flexor like an elastic band, that elastic band's in a shortened position, so we want to elongate that. Otherwise that's going to impact pelvic positioning and then could lead to other issues. And for me, my lower back, L4, L5, microlumbodiscectomy, that was my issue, so I need to keep those hips nice and mobile. So I've been doing that. The other thing, and we're on here, you give me the billing as the high performance coach, this one might shock you, is running. I've added running to my routine. I felt like I wasn't running enough. I've, dare I say, enjoy running with friends now. But what I've done, Charlie, on this one, I've been super careful about the environment that I create. So I used to anchor a negative thought process towards running. I used to identify as a non-runner. And I had to debunk that. I had to say, what am I doing? I've got to stop saying this, that I hate running. Let me move that away. That's not what I'm going to say. I ban myself from saying it furthermore moving forwards. And then I said, okay, I'm going to run. I want to run because, look, at the end of the day, my whole principle is to be an everyday athlete, to be able to run, to be able to jump, to be able to change direction, and to be able to work at high intensity, low intensities, and to be able to shift a little bit of tin in the gym. Not quite as much as you, but enough. And so I run in Richmond Park in London, beautiful environment. I run with friends who I rarely get to see, so we have really cool, inspiring conversations. And we manage our training loads accordingly. We do like 8K. So that for me is something that I've been doing. I've been doing it a minimum once a week, sometimes twice when the sun's shining in London, which isn't that frequently. And I've just been, very consistent with that. So look, maybe that's been a bit of a driver for, I think I'm in all right shape all the time, but maybe I've tightened up a little bit since then. It might be the tan.
Here's a question, which I'm sort of giving the answer to anyway, but is, do you think most people need to do the thing they don't want to do?
Yeah, providing it's aligned with their goals. If it's on their radar, then likely there's an awareness piece that they probably should be doing it. Yeah. I think for me, look, could I get to where I want to go without running? Probably yes, from a body composition point of view. I could be on the bike. I've got a bike in my living room that I do once or twice a week. So if I'm not running, I'll jump on the bike. Physiology would dictate that it's actually a very similar adaptation that we're driving because I'm in the same sort of heart rate zones. But the difference with running, and I've said this quite a bit lately, is people run to get fit, but you've got to be fit to run. I'll give some context behind that. Running is very different to sitting on the bike and getting your legs turning and lungs going. The amount of ground contacts that you have is very, very high. Well, there has to be an awareness piece of what's going on through the lower limb and every time the foot strikes the floor. And if you run suboptimally from a technical point of view, that might heighten injury risk over time. The other thing with running, and I've got to be aware of this, is if I don't run for a few weeks and then I see this acute spike of running 10, 12K, my lower limb is letting me know for the next 2 or 3 days. So this is where running is very different.
Being tight and sore.
Oh, tight, sore, all through kind of gastroc, soleus, those big contributors as to what's going on through the ground because of the impact. Especially if you're running off treadmill on the road, it's very unforgiving. So there has to be an appreciation piece behind that as well. And this is where, like, January, new year, new me, I'm championing that. Great. Just be mindful not to acutely spike what you're doing and going from zero to hero too quickly because you will break down.
This is a good conversation. So then how would you suggest for anyone listening, say they don't do any running now, right? And they want to start getting into that. How would you look to periodize that upwards or plan that upwards? Yeah,
great question. I think there has to be two sides to this. You can absolutely look at running loads and running volumes. I think, look, don't go more than 5K right away and don't try and do it in a PB time either. Just say I'm just going to accumulate that amount of volume. I'm then for the next 24 hours going to see how I felt. How am I feeling? How do I feel at the end of the run? Great. But also, how do I feel the next day? What's going on with my tendons? What's going on with my lower limb? Do I feel okay? If I do, brilliant. I'm going to do another 5K. So maybe then, for the first 2 to 3 weeks, if they can do 2 of those per week, so going from 0 to 2, not too much of a spike, and I'm only going to do 5K. That's the maximal volume I'm going to accumulate. So 10K throughout the week. That might be a little bit high, but anyway, depending on their starting point. And I'm going to do that for maybe 3 or 4 weeks. I'm then going to increase to 6K. It could literally be as simple as that. So you have a very strategic approach over the course of 3 or 4 weeks. You accumulate more volume. You increase by 2K over the course of the week if you're doing the 2 runs, and then you build yourself up that way. The other side that you need to be looking at is in the gym, are you doing any direct work for the lower limb? So are you doing any straight leg work to bias gastroc, a gastrocnemius, part of the calf complex? Are you doing any bent knee work to target the soleus? The soleus is a real key contributor in those ground contact times. Are you also then dosing yourself with some form of plyometrics? Are you doing any landing mechanics? You know, if you're overweight and you're wanting to run, well, what about just absorbing force and applying the brakes and decelerating from an 18-inch box? Boom. Okay, that's going to build some tolerance. It's going to build some eccentric control and braking forces. It's going to help you with the running. And then maybe looking at some pogos, some reactive plyometric work, where you don't have huge flexion at the knee. You want to be springy and reactive.
Even skipping or something like that works.
Skipping,
yeah.
Very similar. So if you took that rope away, that's basically a pogo. A little bit more intent going on with the pogo, but skipping, great point. Absolutely. That will accumulate a bit of volume and a bit of load tolerance that will then help you run.
Interesting. It's one of the things I used to like, but then I've got heavier and heavier and heavier, and then my body's liked it less and less and less, so I've just stayed away from it. Because my lower limbs feel like they're going to die from like carrying the load. Which I think you have to look at the objectivity of like what's the main goal and whether that's contributing to what you want to do right now. Which is another question.
Keep the goal, exactly that.
Yeah. Which I actually think is often where people can get very sidetracked in terms of where is it they want to go, right? Same if someone was like, they want to be a boxer, then you probably shouldn't be training like a bodybuilder, right? Like you don't need excess amount of muscle mass that you're going to have to carry.
Yeah, absolutely. And some do, and they come to us with a split focus of like, okay, I want to run a marathon, but I also want to put on 3 kilos of lean tissue. And we're like, okay, where's the roadmap here? How long is the time frame that we've got? If we've got a year, maybe we can do that. Maybe we can focus on building the tissue first with a singular focus, and then we can obviously pivot and shift. In fact, we did that. We've got a guy, Mike McLaughlin, who, shout out to Mike, he got a sub 3-hour Amsterdam Marathon, 2 hours 54, which is what we trained him for. And now there's going to be a slight shift in his focus. We're trying to build a bit of tissue before he goes again for London or Manchester Marathon next year. So I think that's important, and there has to be this fluctuation. But don't look. You try and chase 2 rabbits, you don't catch any, generally speaking.
I agree 100%. With that being said, though, I'd say like one of the goals of what I want to focus on next year is bringing up my aerobic fitness levels as high as possible whilst like carrying more muscle mass, which I think can be done. It's just your ability to then handle the recovery on the back end.
Yeah.
So like my perspective of that is like you probably don't want to do maybe really intense HIIT work like the day before training legs or maybe the day afterwards.
Spot on. Exactly that. And like if the efficiency of the aerobic system is like the primary driver, you could just go with some zone 2 low end stuff to stay with the whole cardiac output method popularized by Joel Jameson of 120 to 150 BPM. And then you choose the modality to reach that outcome, similar to what I said about bike versus running. You're not going to go and do 10K in Richmond Park, let's be honest, because that wouldn't be smart right now. Fair to say, But you absolutely fine doing a vertical stepper and sending a few emails and voice notes. You'll be fine doing that, but you're staying within the same heart rate zones. You could do the same on the bike. Equally, there's another thing out there. There's a study, a 2007 paper, Helgen study, 4x4s. So it's 4 minutes work at 90% plus max heart rate. And then there's 3 minutes recovery at 70% max heart rate. And then you go again for 4 rounds. It's brutal, but it's a great way of improving top end aerobic system and red zone domination. But again, I'm not going to prescribe that to you right away. You've got to do that low end stuff to build that engine and then go from there. So choosing the modality that's correct for you is really important. So whether that's bike, stepper or running,
Personally, for me, I find it short bike's best to get my heart rate. Like if you're a bigger guy, you can put so much power through it that you're like you're done. Like
your
really
wattage
fast.
is through the roof. Yeah, for sure. But is it sustainable?
Yeah, that's true. That's the next game, right? That's like, and that's the goal, is to have the power and be able to like keep it on for that long.
Yeah.
And actually, I don't know if you've trained Toby Risha before.
I haven't.
No. I introduced you to him. So like, he's been on a podcast while dude's a freak. Like, does loads of weird challenges. Guy's jacked, done bodybuilding shows. Like, he was in the Royal Marines. Just like someone just likes the fucking pain cave of suffering.
Goggins shit.
Yeah. Like that's like every time I see him on social media, he's doing some weird shit. I'm like, why the fuck are you doing that? Not necessarily my cup of tea. When it comes to nutrition, what's your approach specifically in terms of that, like, as maybe a broad overview?
Yeah, so look, we're blessed to have one of the best nutritionists on the planet as part of my business, Perform 365, Dr. James Moore, and a PhD level performance nutritionist. So I've certainly been a sponge and absorbed from him and many others over the years. I'd be a fool not to. I've worked with the best nutritionists on the planet. And it goes back to another James, Dr. James Morton of LMJU, Liverpool John Moores University. He's got a paper called Fuel for the Work Required. And for simplistic listening for the viewers here is you've got to identify, similar to what I said earlier, what is the goal of the session and do you have adequate fuel and energy availability for that session? I work in professional boxing and great, we can get them stronger, great, we can get more powerful, but unless they're making weight, they're not fighting. So there has to be an awareness piece behind that, and we set the obviously fight day, reverse engineer the process, periodize their nutrition on the basis of that, and have framework and guides of where they should be throughout the course of the journey. So certain days, going back to our traffic light system, if they're sparring Monday, Wednesday and Friday, that would be deemed a high day, a very important day, not just from a physiological but from a psychological point of view, because if they have a bad spar, that could get in their head and then impact the next spar and the journey, so on. So that would be a high day from a fueling point of view. But the next day would then be a lower day. So there has to be lower energy availability to then lead to the goal of making weight. For a normal CEO, normal person, we will set them with some guidelines. We certainly go against the World Health Organization's guidelines of 0.8 grams per kilo of body weight for protein intake, which is complete BS in my opinion. We generally look for around 2 to 2.4 grams per kilo of body weight. So for context, how's my maths? An 80 kilo male, that would generally be around anywhere from 160, ideally nudging that up to 200 grams per day. And we know the benefit of key macronutrient like protein to aid muscle protein synthesis, but also if you're on a fat loss journey to improve satiety, the feeling of fullness for longer. And then we can just dose your carbohydrates around those tougher days. That's generally the way we look at it.
Out of interest, what type of calorie amount do boxers tend to, obviously it depends on the weight, right? But like, what do you tend to see in terms of like daily calorie intake for some of the guys when they're trying to make weight? I imagine that's challenging with the outputs really fucking high.
Yeah, exactly. That is because we've got to give them adequate fuel to reach the outputs they want from a training point of view, but then not too much that, wow, okay, the scale weight's not coming down, which is of course why we use objectivity, and of course why we do check weights every single, Monday and Friday. My guys do it in a fasted state on the same set of scales. They've got to send it to me, which they hate doing sometimes, but it is what it is. Otherwise it's on me. So we've had some guys up at like 4,000, 4,500 calories, big cruiserweights. Some of my guys, generally 3,000 calories, maybe 3,500 calories. So yeah, it's quite a lot.
But the output's
crazy. So high. You then look at obviously their RMR, their resting metabolic rate, before they've even done anything. That's at a certain level. So let's just say that's 1,200, 1,500 for some, and then they've just burnt off 3,000 calories in the day. So they're still, even though they're consuming 3,800, 4,000 calories, they still might actually be in a deficit.
How much do you guys look in terms of digestion with that as well? Because like for guys, if they're training a lot, there's a lot of them I imagine are training twice a day to some degree, that then becomes difficult almost to like spread that around the workouts, and particularly if you're sparring, you're not going to really want to eat before that necessarily, like close, like
we look at certain food groups and like glycemic index rating of foods, that they're not going to have like a huge bowl of pasta an hour before a spar for obvious reasons from a digestion point of view. They may have an hour and a half before a spar a couple of slices of like a half a bagel with a thin layer of jam and chopped bananas, maybe with a drizzle of honey. Maybe not all of that actually, but with one of the two, the jam or the honey, because again that will be quick usable energy, quick release, and not really impact their digestive system. So there's a strategy behind not just get the carbs in, what type of carbs are we having and when are we having them.
Interesting you said that, because some people are so anal that you can't have anything like bread or like anything that's quick sugars. There's like this huge camp that's like fucking anti-sugar, that it's like the devil, where it's like, in my opinion, it's a tool that you can utilize really well, in particular around like a workout window, that most people are just completely oblivious to.
Definitely, if you're strategic with it, for sure. That's something that's worked well for us. For those who don't believe in it, it's entirely up to them, but it's worked well for us. Again, I suppose it depends what the outcome is.
What's the one question I haven't asked I should ask?
Oh, blimey. Wow. Not that question. The one question you should ask.
Oh. If there was one thing that you could give to someone as like, this is the biggest thing that's going to make the most difference for you in 2024, what would you focus on?
Yeah, okay. Start where you stand. And what I mean by that is identify where you're at currently, not where your former self was 5 years ago when you were consistently training 5 or 6 days a week, not what these 10 people on social media are posting with their filters and whatever else they're editing these days on their pictures. Don't get blurred by all of that. Identify where you're at, identify where you're looking to go, and then either find a coach or put some form of strategy in place to reach that goal. Follow the KISS approach, a simple acronym, keep it simple, stupid. Simplicity wins. Doing the fundamentals and basics well consistently over time will get the best ROI.
That's probably the best answer you could give. And that applies to fucking everything in there.
Absolutely.
And it's a good note to finish on. Thank you very much for your time, Dan. Where's best people to find out more about you and Perform 365?
Yeah, thanks, Charlie. Always good to chat. So online, my main page is at Dan Lawrence 365 and also Perform 365 as well on Instagram.
Awesome. Make sure you go head over and check out Dan and see what he does. Also listen to the other podcasts we've done together. If you guys enjoyed that, make sure you like the podcast, subscribe, share with a friend, and we'll see you next episode very soon.